everyone, it's Minutia Minute, coming at you guys with a video that I'm really excited about. So, with Marvel having just started the new Alien ongoing series, and with the imminent release of the first Aliens Omnibus that Marvel is putting out of old Alien material, I thought it would be fun to take a look back at the Alien books of the past. The point of this being partially a buying guide, partially a retrospective, and partially a disambiguation, because there is a lot of Dark Horse Aliens history out there that is worth looking at, worth going back to. If you're thinking about picking up the Omnibus, this will go over a lot of stuff that's going to be in that upcoming Omnibus. But if you're also someone who's just like at a used bookstore or at your local comic shop and looking at old Aliens books, wondering what to buy, this video will hopefully help you on that journey. Because as I said before, there's a lot of great stuff out there, and it would be a shame for you not to check it out just because the franchise is too messy to figure out where to start. So with that being said, this video is going to cover basically the first 20 years of the Alien franchise in comic book form. Almost all of it is going to be the Dark Horse run from 1988 to 1999. After 1999, there was about a 10-year period where no Aliens books were being put out, and that'll be the conclusion of this video, and we'll visit some of the stuff from 2009 on to present day in another video. And the primary focus of this video over that period is going to be around trades and omnibuses. There are a lot of single issues out there that were not assembled in any form of trade, but all the heavy hitter stuff, all the really major storylines are accounted for in Dark Horse collections, whether it's in their Omnibus series or in their trade paperbacks. And if you find yourself wanting to go deeper, then I would definitely recommend taking a look at the upcoming Omnibus that Marvel's putting out, which is going to exhaustively print everything Dark Horse ever put out. So with that being said, let's take a look at the one comic book that is not by Dark Horse in this video, and that is Alien, the Illustrated Story by Archie Goodwin and Walter Simonson. Now, this is a fantastic read. If you are super familiar with the material, you don't really need to read it. This is one of those books you can literally just let the art tell the story for you, especially since Alien is such a simple story. You can just let Walt Simonson's art just wash over you. There's a lot of really cool artwork in this, a lot of really cool splash pages. Definitely worth checking out if you can find a copy of it. I believe it has been reprinted by Titan Books, but I don't know if that is a full-size edition like the original heavy metal version. But either way you can get it, definitely worth taking a look at. Nothing really super to report beyond the artwork because it is just a straight adaptation of the original Alien. After Alien the Illustrated Story came out, there really wouldn't be any Alien comic books printed that I know of until Dark Horse got the license shortly after the Aliens sequel came out. So after the release of Alien the Illustrated Story, as far as I know, there were not any Alien comic books that were put out until Dark Horse got the license shortly after the Alien sequel was released in theaters. Once they got a hold of the license, they decided to release a 6-issue miniseries, and that is collected in Aliens Book 1. It's by Mark Verheiden and Mark A. Nelson. It's illustrated in black and white with really, really cool artwork in my opinion, and it tells the story of what happened to Newt and Hicks after the events of Aliens. You'll notice I don't mention Ripley here because they were not allowed to use the Ripley character until later, and so it really just focuses on the two of them. This initial miniseries really set the tone early for what these Aliens books were going to be all about. It really did a lot of world building to explain more about how the aliens' hive minds worked. It explored who the jockey was in the chair in the original Alien, and it was the core foundation for everything that came afterwards. There are so many cool elements to this story that I would love to spoil for you guys, but this is definitely the book. If you only read one, pick up book 1. It is basically self-contained. It ends on kind of a dark note, but you could basically just take this initial 6-issue series on its own as a standalone sequel to Aliens, and just have it be sort of the make-believe Alien 3 that you never got. After the initial Dark Horse 6-issue miniseries was a success, they immediately launched a second series, also by author Mark Verheiden, but this time with art by Den Beauvais. Sorry, I'm sure I mispronounced that name. Those 4 issues are collected here in book 2, and we basically switch from a black and white story to a story that's painted and in color. This trade paperback here collects all 4 issues from that second series, and personally of the Mark Verheiden books that were written initially, this is actually probably my favorite of the three, just because I really find that the art style really jives well. I think Mark Verheiden is better at writing comic books in this than he was in the first one. The first one's a little bit clunky and a little bit confusing. You kind of have to work through the layouts to understand what's going on in the story. This is much more smoothed out, much more even, but still has some really cool revelations, some really interesting story developments that keeps you excited about what might come in the future. In regards to the art on this, it definitely set a tone, which was that Dark Horse wasn't going to stick to one individual style and move forward with that. Much like the Alien, Aliens, and Alien 3 films, they went out of their way to look for different visions, different styles of storytelling to help the series stay fresh throughout, which is part of why it's so much fun to read these books now in retrospect. As we go through, you're going to see there's a ton of great classic artists that worked on Aliens, and it's the only franchise where you can kind of get all of those people under one umbrella. The second volume of Aliens was just as successful, if not more so, than the first one, which led Dark Horse to go immediately into the third volume, which now had a subtitle. So if you're looking for part 3 of the story, you're going to want to look for Aliens Earth War. And this is the one that brings Ripley back into the story. If you've read the first two and haven't read this, you may wonder how it is that Ripley could get back involved. She was so far removed from those first two stories. Mark Verheiden's explanation for that is actually really, really compelling, makes for a super interesting character beat for Ripley, and actually makes a stronger story overall, where it could have been an opportunity knowing that initially the only reason she wasn't in it was because they weren't allowed to use her. One of the great things about this particular 4-issue miniseries is Verheiden makes that an advantage rather than a handicap going into this final story. And if you read all three of these, basically it forms a trilogy, one epic sprawling story that leaves the story off on a pretty definitive conclusion, but much like the first volume, also a very bleak conclusion, and one that definitely left the door open if Dark Horse was to decide to continue. Which of course, they certainly did. Now this is the point in the Alien franchise when things really started to expand. The fourth miniseries, also collecting 4 issues, was written by John Arducci, illustrated by Damon Willis. If Mark Verheiden's series built the universe, John Arducci really set a sustainable status quo for books moving forward after this point. The big revelation in this book is that while the films and the initial 3 volumes of the comics dealt a lot with how the aliens could be weaponized, this offers up the idea that the aliens could be just as useful from a pharmaceutical drug standpoint. And while that idea in and of itself has kind of an early 90s war on drugs vibe to it, the way it's leveraged in this story in particular is really just a framework for a lot of crazy cool ideas that John Arducci brought to the table. In this you have multiple queen aliens and they're all warring with each other, and you have space marines stuck in the middle of it trying to harvest this miracle drug. You get a lot of really cool images and concepts along the way, up to and including the juxtaposition of an alien curled up with a saxophone, which is kind of a particularly memorable moment. Now, as I said, it's right around this time that the series really started to explode. This is around the time that Alien 3 was coming out, which made these books even more popular, but also created a little bit of a problem for the books because the events of that film directly contradict the events of those initial 3 Mark Verheiden stories that tell the ongoing adventures of Newt, Hicks, and Ripley. The initial solution to that was for Dark Horse to have Bantam Spectra Publishing put out a series of novels depicting the events of those initial comic book stories, but retell the story in such a way that it doesn't conflict with the films. And so that brought us these 3 trade paperbacks. Earth Hive, which tells the story of Aliens Book 1, Nightmare Asylum, which tells the story of Aliens Book 2, and Aliens Book 3, The Female War, which tells the story of Earth War. The big thing that these novels brought to the table is they changed the names of the characters. So instead of being the ongoing adventures of Newt and Hicks, you get the ongoing adventures of Wilkes and Billy. And then when Ripley comes back at the end of Book 2 and the beginning of Book 3, she comes back as an android version of herself so that it doesn't conflict with what happens to the real Ripley in Alien 3. Overall, this retcon ended up being pretty controversial, and we will come back around to that a little bit later on when we're looking at additional trade paperbacks. So after Genocide came out, which also got its own paperback, by the way. The franchise really exploded, and there were a lot of different comic books, one-shots, ongoing series being put out by Dark Horse. We will not be focusing in on those. We're going to continue with kind of the main story thread, the main miniseries that were printed in trade format. If you are interested in some of those, but don't want to pick them up in singles, I will point you to a couple places you can check those out without having to buy the Marvel Omnibus. Meanwhile, the next major series to get collected by Dark Horse was the 4-issue miniseries Alien's Hive, which, in all honesty, my favorite part of this book is the cover. I love the idea of the alien playing fetch with the dog. There's something just bizarrely menacing about it that I really enjoy. Overall, this is actually one of my lesser favorite series. It does have great art again by Kelly Jones, but the main thing that holds it back is that at this point the Dark Horse series, in terms of the plot, is becoming a little bit formulaic, which is really just mad scientist is taking chances with aliens that he shouldn't be taking and causes some kind of horrible event to occur with some kind of a murder twist at the end of the book. However, that said, this still has some pretty cool ideas in it. The alien you see in the cover is actually an android alien that they've created to interact with a hive of aliens, and that alien actually has a pretty interesting personality. So this is worth a read. It's just not quite as good as the material that came before. And as with the prior Aliens miniseries, this also got a trade paperback. This one was called Alien Harvest, though. Next up is the miniseries Rogue by Ian Eddington and Will Simpson. And similar to Alien's Hive, it's one of my lesser favorite stories. As a matter of fact, this is actually probably my least favorite. The cool concept in this one is that there is a rogue alien that doesn't conform to the hive, and so it's kind of a wild card. It's gone rogue, if you will. I don't remember all the circumstances around it. It's another where it has a downer ending, there's a mad scientist involved, etc., etc. And even though that one wasn't my favorite, it was followed up by a really good one, which is Aliens Labyrinth. And it's kind of funny because you've got the mad scientist routine going on. However, what they do with it in this miniseries is just a lot more interesting. You have this crazy scientist who's running evil experiments on people who are injured in his sort of cube space station here. He's got a whole fleet of aliens at his command, and they've learned to, like, work with him. Like, he has, like, aliens walkers, kind of like a dog walker with, like, the harness that he can move aliens around the ship with him. He's super protective of the aliens and doing all these horrible things to the people. At the center of this space station is a labyrinth where he basically experiments by having the aliens run through the maze like a rat and see what kinds of decisions they make depending on what situations he puts in the maze for them to find. Really, really cool story and just a big uptick from the last couple. Unfortunately, Labyrinth represents the point in the series where Dark Horse is a little spottier with their collecting of the miniseries, and there are two miniseries in this period that were ironically novelized but not collected in trade paperback form. And those are Music of the Spears, which again, there's the novel of it, and then Aliens Berserker, which is the name of the novel. The story this is based on, though, is actually Aliens Frenzy. Again, these are stories that can be found elsewhere. You just won't find them in a single individual trade. The next, and unfortunately final, main series trade we got before everything changes, which I'll explain in just a few minutes, is Alien Stronghold. And what I will say about this is a great capstone on the series. So if you get through the Verheiden books and you go through the next set of books that I've shown you, Stronghold is actually a pretty good capstone for that initial series. This is written by John Arducci again, and the thing that's cool about Stronghold is not only does it have great art, but Arducci's story really synthesizes a lot of elements that have been pulled from prior ongoing series that really ties everything together in kind of a nice thematic bow. Now, this trade paperback was put out in July of 1996, and right after this, August 1996, is when the whole series kind of got upended and the whole publishing strategy Dark Horse had changed. And this is why I think it's important to have a disambiguation video like this to kind of explain for those of you guys who aren't familiar with what happened. So after Stronghold came out in July, the following August, Dark Horse put out Aliens Outbreak. Now, what exactly is Aliens Outbreak? You'll notice it's written by Mark Verheiden and Mark Nelson. Yes, this is the first series, Aliens Volume 1, now with the subtitle of Outbreak. The other important thing about this is they retooled the story and recolored it in order to align with 20th Century Fox film continuity. I would assume at this point they were really gearing up for Aliens Resurrection, which I'm pretty sure came out in 1997 or 98. I don't remember exactly when. Regardless, at this point, the original series was no longer available, and this was the version of it you could buy. Think Star Wars Special Edition. There was also a new edition of Volume 2, which was now called Nightmare Asylum. At least this one lines up with what the paperback subtitle was, whereas Outbreak is just a completely new title, different from the paperback and different from that initial Volume 1. And then, of course, you guessed it, we got Aliens Female War, which contains another retooled, recolored version of that original third volume, which was originally called Earth War. Again, the title aligns with what the paperback was. And this retelling in particular is especially problematic because you have Ripley in it, but they never actually explain that she's the android version of Ripley. And so unless you've read the book version of this, it's still not really going to make sense in terms of the quote-unquote continuity that they're trying to adhere to. Since they were on a roll, they decided to continue releasing these updated Aliens trade paperbacks. Anytime you see on the back Aliens Library Edition, then you'll know you're looking at one of these new updated versions. Now, only the first 3 really suffered in terms of re-editing, retooling. However, they at minimum are going to have a new cover and sometimes a different title. So next up, we've got Aliens Genocide. We have Aliens Harvest, which was formerly Aliens Hive, and in paperback form, Alien Harvest. We've got Aliens Rogue, Aliens Labyrinth, and Aliens Stronghold. Dark Horse did release one final collected edition in this library format. It fits with the spine and the cover strategy, and that is Aliens Kidnapped. This is not technically a library edition, but again, if you line them all up on the shelf, you're going to see it looks like it fits into that. And this is basically just collecting a previously uncollected 3-issue miniseries and a couple short stories from Dark Horse Presents. Thematically, it's pretty disconnected with Stronghold or any of the things that came before, but it is kind of a fun read and has some good art in it. Definitely worth a pickup if you see it. And so if you want to get all these library style editions, you're going to be looking at 9 books total. As you can see, they look pretty great on the shelf. Definitely worth a pickup if you're interested, but again, they are alternative versions of stories that were originally told better. Now, even though that's all of the library editions, that isn't quite everything that Dark Horse put out. So here are just a few random trade paperbacks that don't really fit into the rest of the story here, that are definitely worth noting, especially if you see them out in the wild and decide you want to pick them up. First up, Dark Horse Presents did put together a series of Aliens short stories from prior Dark Horse Presents episodes. It was originally released for $4.95 in this kind of prestige format. Not quite a trade paperback, but this is one that's definitely worth picking up because you do have a short story in here by Mark Verheiden and also multiple other short stories by John Arducci. This by no means represents everything Dark Horse Presents put out under the Alien banner, but it is a cool initial collection of them. Dark Horse also put out an illustrated novel called Tribes. And this is available in softcover and hardcover. It's written by Stephen Bissett, illustrated by Dave Dorman. I don't really include this in the regular ongoing miniseries because, again, it's really more of a novel with illustrations than it is a comic book. Then finally, right in 1999, kind of at the tail end of when they were putting new books out, they released Aliens Apocalypse, The Destroying Angels, which is another 4-issue miniseries. Pretty interesting stuff. I think it's important to note that with this one, there are elements in it that seem to ignore the prior continuity and kind of go off in their own direction. We are now after the time when Alien Resurrection came out, and so possibly they were feeling less attached to those original Alien stories. So definitely an interesting read as a one-off, but don't necessarily expect this one to fit into the narrative of the rest. And then finally, in 2001, 2 years technically outside of the window that we're looking at, they did put out one final standard trade paperback, which was Aliens Salvation and Sacrifice. And this basically just collects 2 prestige format one-shots. The first one, Salvation, by Dave Gibbons and Mike Mignola, and the second one, Sacrifice, by Peter Milligan and Paul Johnson. Both of these stories pretty much stand completely on their own. If you just want to hop in and see something with some interesting art that's aliens themed, you could definitely pick this one up. I don't think the stories are as strong as the main ongoing series that they did initially, but they are definitely an interesting novelty, and they do have a thematic connection just within themselves, basically following religion and how religious people think about the aliens. So at last we really come to the conclusion of the initial Aliens publications by Dark Horse. In 1999, they stopped putting out new Dark Horse Aliens books. They took a 10-year hiatus before coming back in 2009. However, Dark Horse wasn't completely done publishing stuff over that hiatus period. Between 2007 and 2009, right before they started launching new books, Dark Horse did collect the majority of their work in a series of 6 omnibuses. So I'm going to show those guys off to you really quick before we wrap up the video, and I'll discuss a little bit about what's contained in each of the volumes. First up, you get Aliens Omnibus Volume 1. This collects basically the complete Mark Verheiden run, plus his short story in Dark Horse Presents. The downside to this volume is it is going to be the edited versions of those initial 3 stories. You're not getting the original stories with Newt and Hicks. You're getting the ones with Wilkes and Billy. Next up, Volume 2 collects Genocide and Harvest, aka Hive. Again, these are the library edition versions of these stories. This is definitely an omnibus you might want to consider picking up on its own because it does include the 10 issues of Colonial Marines that they put out roughly during the same time period. Aliens Omnibus Volume 3 collects Rogue, Sacrifice, Labyrinth, Salvation, and then some previously uncollected material, Advent, Terminus, Reapers, and Horror Show. And those are a combination of like one-shots and Dark Horse Presents material, I'm pretty sure. Now the 4th volume, Aliens Omnibus, is actually another one that I would definitely recommend checking out, because not only is this one going to collect Stronghold, but you're also going to get a collection of Music of the Spears, which was novelized, Frenzy, which was novelized as Berserker, as well as a couple of other additional shorter works. I can't remember if they're miniseries or one-shots off the top of my head. By the time you get to Volume 5, you're basically getting into a whole bunch of mop-up territory. So Volume 5 is going to include Alchemy, Kidnap, which was previously collected, Survival, Cargo, Alien, Earth Angel, Incubation, Havoc, Lovesick, and Lucky, all of which were never collected before this point. As is the case with Volume 6, which has Apocalypse right at the front of it, and then after that you have a whole bunch of new stuff. Once in a Lifetime, Xenogenesis, Headhunters, Tourist Season, Pig, Borderlines, 45 Seconds, Elder Gods, Purge, Glass Corridor, Stalker, and Wraith. A lot of these are Dark Horse Presents and single issues, but I do remember, if I remember correctly, Xenogenesis was a pretty big one that it was kind of surprising that they never originally collected it. And that pretty much wraps up my Aliens Disambiguation Overview Buyer's Guide. Just a reminder, this doesn't represent every single title that Dark Horse put out over that period. It's just what they collected in trade or omnibus. If you want the entire package, what you're going to want to look for is either the singles or the Marvel omnibuses that are coming out starting soon. Again, this is only covering basically the first half of Dark Horse's Aliens output before their initial hiatus. I will be back at a later time with the second half, featuring material basically published from 2009 onward until Marvel got the rights to the Alien book. In the meantime, if you happen to pick any of these books up, have any thoughts on them, be sure to let me know down in the comments. I would love to talk about these books. They're a lot of fun to read. And if you read most of these, then I would love to know what was your favorite. In the meantime, I hope you guys had a good week reading comics.